in these early days, how did you develop the wholesome image that you're known for? Did it just come naturally, or was it something you thought about, or
My image, whatever it is, was never preconceived or managed, or it's not anything anybody tried to make up. I just tried to be myself when I went on TV, and I bathed regularly and combed my hair and wore pressed pants. I wore white buck shoes, which became my trademark unintentionally, because kids in high school and college all over America then were wearing white bucks. And they were the only decent pair of shoes I had, and they'd go with anything, and I could always whiten them up with that little dust bag. So I was the first teenager, or first kid, to go on TV wearing white bucks, and immediately they recognized one of their own. But it was not something that we thought of ahead of time. We realized later that that's what had happened. And we didn't hide the fact I was married, didn't hide the fact that I went to church, didn't hide anything. And so the image, whatever it was and became, was just people getting to know who Pat Boone is.
So then a very important show in your life happened. It was the Pat Boone Chevy Show, 1957. How did that come about?
I was the youngest guy ever to have his own network television show. I mean, of course, there have been some younger since, but, to get on TV and have your own show at that point in the mid-50s, late 50s, you were considered an adult, an accomplished performer. I was really a newcomer. I'd had a couple of hit movies and a lot of hit records from 55. In fact, in 55, one incredible stat that I didn't know at the time, but have since learned, is that from March of 55 to February of 56, just before Elvis had his first big hit record, Heartbreak Hotel, I had 6 million-selling singles, 2 of them number ones, in 11 months. So it was an eruption, and then came Elvis on top of that, and we became friendly competitors, 2 boys from Tennessee, for years and years after that. So the TV people and my agents at that time, knowing that I had hosted TV shows in Fort Worth, actually, the way it really came about was that the agents from General Artists Corporation came to see me, said, how old are you? And I said, 21. You're going to be the youngest guy ever to have his own television show. Really? No kidding. He said, yeah, Perry Como, you've been on his show, his 15-minute show, three afternoons a week. Perry was on for 15 minutes. And he's leaving CBS. He's going to NBC. He's going to do an hour nighttime show. And CBS wants you to take over his 15-minute slot at 21. I said, well, that's great. I'd love to do it. Who's the sponsor? They said, Chesterfield Cigarettes. I said, I don't smoke. Oh, you don't have to smoke, but they're the sponsor. I said, but wait a minute. If I'm going to be there, they're going to sponsor me. Am I not supposed to be trying to sell cigarettes and maybe to teenagers, my fans? No, you're thinking too much. Just, even Perry doesn't smoke much, so, forget about that. I said, guys, I can't. I cannot work for a cigarette sponsor. I'm sorry. They looked at my manners and said, this is insane. So they went away, came back a month or two later, another meeting. How old are you now? I said, 21. You're still going to be the youngest guy ever to have his own Really? I said, who's the sponsor? They said, Schlitz Beer. I said, guys, I can't. I can't sell beer to kids. And they, in effect, said to my manager, send this boy back to Tennessee. He's not for this business. And I thought maybe they were right. I was still going to be a school teacher. But another meeting occurred not too long after that. How old are you? I said, 21. They said, have you got anything against Chevrolet? I said, no, I'm driving one. I'm driving a Chevrolet. It's my first car. I love it. So I went to work for Chevrolet then for 3 years. But that is how it came to be that I hosted the Pat Boone Chevy showroom, which at times was #1 in the Nielsen's.
You mentioned earlier that Arthur Godfrey was a very hands-on guy. I assume that means with his shows too.
Mhm.
Did he
Oh, yeah.
influence you in terms of how you were involved with your TV shows?
I wish I could say that I was like Arthur Godfrey in that way, but I wasn't. Only really because I was so busy in other things. I was in college. I've just made 2 movies. I'm planning to get a Phi Beta Kappa key at Columbia University and teach English. So I took a semester off and I made Bernadine and April Love movies. They're big hits. Now I'm back in school. Now they were starting my TV show in the fall of '57. And it is just another thing added to my schedule. And so I didn't know anything about producing a TV show. I knew I could walk on and sing with my guests, and I could sing my solos, and I could host if there was a teleprompter or somebody told me what to say. But no, I never was involved in the production. I wasn't hands-on at all. I just showed up, and in the midst of everything else I was doing in my life, I would do my TV show on a Thursday night, ABC, 9 o'clock. And then Friday morning, I was back in school at Columbia and taking full load, and making good grades. So that was, and then on the weekend, maybe performing somewhere in a concert, and then back Monday to do some early planning, that is, reading a script, talking over what we're going to do with Gina Lollobrigida or Nat King Cole or Ella Fitzgerald or Tony Bennett as my guests. And then I'm back to school, and I'm just sandwiching my several lives with the TV show.
Was that show primarily a music show?
It was music and variety. We did sketches. We had a lot of music, but we had some great writers, comedy writers. Woody Allen was one of my writers. Now, he never mentions me in his resume, and I've chided him about that. But he was still in school, college at NYU, and doing stand-up down in Greenwich Village. And our head writer, Larry Gelbart, MASH, was the head writer on my show. And we had other great writers. And they knew about this guy that was, making some noise down in Greenwich Village with his quirky sense of humor. And they had him as an intern writer on my show. And I remember standing in the hallway as Woody would say, Pat, what you ought to do, here's an idea I have for a sketch, you ought to do this. And I would slide down the wall laughing and sit on the floor at the audacity of thinking about what he was proposing we do on the show, which appealed to me greatly. I would have done it, but I knew that the other writers and the director and producer weren't going to go for it. But we did some of his jokes. So he did actually, I did some Woody Allen jokes that originated in his fervid brain on my show. And then, of course, Larry Gelbart and other writers. So I was not hands-on, but we had excellent people doing the shows.
Rock and roll was in its infancy then, and it wasn't called rock then, it was called rock and roll.
Yeah.
Did you feature rock and roll on your show?
We had rock and roll, yeah. We had Danny and the Juniors, and we had whoever some of the top rock and roll acts were, because rock and roll didn't get as raunchy as it did. It was not as raunchy then. In fact, the reason, quote, race music or rhythm and blues was a real iffy thing for parents and preachers and teachers across the country was that, there were scatological or other elements in the music. It was suggestive in many cases, and even the phrase rock and roll was a sexual phrase in its infancy. So now we're calling the music rock and roll, and parents are concerned. But on my show, I could sing Tutti Frutti, change one little phrase. Little Richard, original record was, boy, you don't know what she do to me. I changed it to Pretty Little Susie is the girl for me. I made it harmless. The kids didn't care. It was just the music and the feel that they loved. Ain't that a shame? I mean, I did that verbatim. But even did Long Tall Sally about Uncle John ducking back in the alley when he saw Aunt Mary. and it made it all so harmless that that the parents accepted it, and so we had some of the rock and roll artists on our show. And we featured all the current pop music of the day, which increasingly was rock and roll. I remember singing Poison Ivy with Nat King Cole, and it was a charming number, really was. And of course, if I had Connie Francis or some other Frankie Avalon, they called it rock and roll, but it was more pop than rock and roll at that time.
Did you get any flack, though, from anyone for doing covers of R&B tunes?
No flack whatsoever from artists or the producers of the music, because rhythm and blues was a separate genre. Pop records, pop radio, it took a while for them to begin to play and then to really popularize these rock and roll songs. And the proof of what I'm saying here is that there were many rhythm and blues hits and hit makers, artists at that time. Nobody remembers today. The only ones that are remembered today, their songs or they themselves, are the ones that were covered by Elvis, by me, the Beatles, and other artists who popularized their songs and then in so doing attracted attention to the artist. Little Richard has said that. I have a tape, an audio tape of his on radio soon after I had recorded Tutti Frutti and Long Tall Sally. And he was telling the DJ on a black radio station, he says, you know, when Pat Boone did my song Tutti Frutti, he said, I was still washing dishes in a bus station in Macon, Georgia. He said, because my record was getting played, but I wasn't getting no money. But he says, when Pat Boone did my song, he said, I threw the towel down and walked out of there because I knew I was going to make some money now. Well, that was what he felt, what Fats Domino and Chuck Berry and the others felt at the time. Their memory sometimes gets a little cloudy when they realize that maybe publishers didn't give them what they're entitled to, or maybe Little Richard would sell a song like Tutti Frutti for $500. It took him 30 minutes to write. And so, whoop, $500, great. Then it becomes an all-time classic, and he thinks somebody robbed me. Well, I understand, but they all know that not just I, but the other artists who recorded their songs popularized not just the songs, and they made more money. As Fats Domino said, he made more money from my record of Ain't That a Shame than he did from his own, because his wasn't getting played in front of that vast pop audience until after I had a hit with it. And my record of Ain't That a Shame went to number 4 in the same R&B charts where his had been number 1. And I had 9 records in the R&B charts and was accepted as an R&B artist. I think maybe some of the folks listening to R&B radio thought initially I was black, as some of the DJs had. And of course I took that as a great compliment. And the heat that I took, though, was from the mamas and some of the ministers that were concerned about rock and roll itself and the lyrics and sort of the suggestive nature of some of the songs, and so they thought, well, that nice white Pat Boone ought not to be singing those songs, and it's going to be the ruination of our kids, you know. And my own family, although they were glad that I was having hit records, liked it better when I just sang some Perry Como or some kind of a pop song. And of course, I got a lot more heat when I began to have some of the original artists on my television show, because we had, you know, all the great black performers on our show, and I was thrilled that they would come on my show. Ella Fitzgerald and Johnny Mathis and Nat King Cole and the Mills Brothers and Sammy Davis Jr. and on and on. And we were sponsored by Chevrolet. And Chevrolet, their dealers in the South, were beginning to take heat because, you know, the bigotry, the prejudice was still ingrained. And they would tell the dealer, the Chevy dealer, it would come back to us, you know, we like that Pat Boone doing that show for you, but, you know, he has all those black people on, and that is not the words they used. And if that keeps up, we may not buy our next car from you. Now, so it was hitting them in the pocketbook. Well, we had a meeting one day because Harry Belafonte called, and he was the top performer in the world at that point. And he said, I've seen how you treat your guests, he said, and I like the way you do your show. he said, would you like me to come on, maybe sing a couple of songs, maybe sing something with you? I said, oh, are you serious? Of course. I think I was 23. And so I went, we had our planning meeting with the agency, with Chevrolet, with the ABC, everybody, staff. You're not going to believe this. Harry Belafonte has called and offered to come on my show. And instead of being really delighted, there was like a pall that fell over everybody. I said, what's the matter? Well, we're sorry, but we can't accept that. It's nice of him. I said, why? And then they told me more than I had known about the problems that the Chevy dealers were having down south, about the number of black performers. And Harry particularly was beginning now to take some civil rights stands and say some things that were rubbing some people wrong. And they said, so we're going to have to politely decline. And I was so taken back. I said, after a few minutes of contemplation, I said, guys, let me say something. It says it's the Pat Boone Chevy showroom. If I have to say no to Harry Belafonte, it's not the Pat Boone show. So I'm going to have to ask you to get somebody else to replace me because I can't go forward with the show anymore. What? You're going to walk off your show because you can't have this get? I said, guys, you know it's more than that. I know the problem. I grew up in the South, but I can't be part of the problem. And so I'm appreciative. I love doing it, but it's not the Pat Boone show if I have to call Harry Belafonte back and say thanks, but no thanks. So then we had more conversation. Well, if he does come on, can you guarantee as a gentleman that there won't be any subliminal messages and stuff that's going to maybe close a couple Chevy dealerships to close down in the South? I said, yeah, I can. I'm sure that Harry will be a gentleman. Certainly, you've got my word. I'd like to say that he came on, but this was my third and last season, as it turned out. And between his schedule that was already set and ours, we weren't able to mesh the two. But I had been willing to not do the show to begin with because of the sponsors, and I felt conscientiously I couldn't continue doing it if I was going to perpetuate a problem that I grew up in and knew full well from my own relatives. But I felt somebody's got to take a stand here somewhere, sometime. And so we worked it out, but it didn't turn out that he came on. But I still have great admiration for Harry.
What was it, in that your main sponsor was Chevy, how was advertising worked into the show? I mean, was there product placement at the time?
Oh, product placement, although we used cars for props and backgrounds, and it was not uncommon for me to jump into a Corvette and sing, "See the USA in your Chevrolet, America's inviting you to call," and and drive off the set in the Corvette. I did that with Pierre Angeli one night, I remember in particular. But and I did the commercials. One night, these things happen on live TV, of course. My mic hanging over my head for my opening tune, for some reason, was unplugged or something went wrong. I come on the air live. I'm singing my opening song. The orchestra, the chorus is singing, but you can hear them, but you can't hear me at all. And in a mad rush to try to get that mic out and another big boom mic over, they knocked the whole set down behind me. And you still never heard me. We went away to the first commercial, and you've never heard my voice, and yet you saw the set fall down. So when it came back out of commercial, I guess it was the Arthur Godfrey in me. But as the mic now, the red light came on, and the sound man said, "What? That one's dead too." And then I started talking. That's just a joke. I mean, I said we had a sound problem here, as you noticed, and now we're back on the air. Then I went into the commercial later in the show, and I was drawing something with a marking pen on a blackboard, but somebody left the cap off and it was dry. And I'm there trying to draw what I'm supposed to draw on the backboard to do the Chevy commercial, because like Arthur Godfrey, I was willing to do the commercials for my sponsor. Not most TV performers didn't do that, but I was perfectly willing to. And I had to ad-lib and make some excuses for the fact that the pen wouldn't work. Somebody threw me one finally that did. But you just had to, when stuff happened live, you either had to make something of it or go down in flames, because you couldn't change it. It was just happening right there before your eyes.
Did Arthur Godfrey give you any advice when you were doing your own show?
I don't remember him ever giving me any advice, because by the time I started my own show, I had appeared with him for a year and a half and had proven to him that I knew how to do it. And he came on my show as a guest, and we sat and had some ad-lib chatter, and he played something on his ukulele, and then we sang something together. And for me, it was a blessing to be able to have the man that had really given me tremendous exposure, that I really looked up to as a giant in the industry, and to have him as a guest on my show, that he was even willing to be a guest on the show of somebody that had really, in a way, grown up and been introduced to the TV audience on his show. But he was gracious that way, and we got to be together in the latter couple of years of his life. He moved to California. He'd had cancer surgery. He was carrying a big tank of oxygen around. He had emphysema in the one lung he had left, and lost a lot of weight. And Shirley and I were very grateful to have him at our house for dinner and for some holidays. For Christmas, we would invite Arthur to come over and sit in our family gathering. He missed all of that himself. And so I was able to really show my gratitude to him, which is rare, because of all of that. And so he knew when he was in his prime, he knew when he was in his latter days, that there was a guy that greatly appreciated all he'd done for me.
When you were doing the Chevy show in the late 50s, what was the state of television then? I mean, what did audiences want to see?
The year I started my Pat Boone Chevy show, there were 17 musical variety shows on the air. I mean, it was so hard to get guests because they were in demand. I mean, anybody could carry a tune was wanted as a guest on 5 other shows. And so, I mean, Giselle McKenzie, Polly Bergen, George Gobel, Nat Cole, just on and on and on had their own music shows. So, of course, that was the plat du jour. That's what people wanted right then, was musical variety. There's never been a time like it. Of course, then there were the Westerns, and Chevy sponsored Bonanza on Sunday night, as well as Dinah Shore, an hour show on Sunday nights. They had 2 big hour shows, and then my half hour. And that's why I left my own half hour show, was I felt it was time, my management did, that I should go from half hour to hour. If I was going to be on TV, I should go to an hour show. And Chevy just wasn't going to do another hour show, so I left. I'd had, people don't know this, they don't remember this, but during the summers, when I'd come to Hollywood to make a movie during my summer break of 13 weeks, and I would have somebody take my slot, because I had it for 52 weeks on ABC, and I was leaving them a top-rated slot. So my first summer replacement was a guy named Dick Van Dyke, and it was his first television show. The next summer was Andy Williams, his first television show, and the third summer, the 2 of them co-hosted my Chevy show slot, and it was still the Chevy show. So Dick Van Dyke and Andy both, and I have always been great friends, because amazingly, though I'm younger than both, I think, I was instrumental in helping them get their own first TV shows, and they went on to do great things.
When you were 21 and you had the opportunity to do this show as the youngest guy at the time to have done it, was that intimidating to you at all?
You know, I've not ever been intimidated by anything I can think of. And maybe it's a failing, maybe it's something missing in my brain or my psyche, but I've always felt if the opportunity came, then it was for some reason, and I could step into the opportunity and do something with it. So no, I wasn't intimidated. I wondered at the wisdom of the sponsor or the network, particularly that first season when I was up against 16 other musical variety shows, and I'm the youngest and never had, done anything that way, although I'd hosted local shows in Nashville and in Fort Worth. So I might have had more experience than some of these other singers in actually hosting shows and having to ad-lib around situations that weren't supposed to happen. And so I just felt, yeah, I can do this. I just have come from making a couple of movies, and I'm having sensational audiences in my concerts and hit records. Yeah, I can do this. So no, I strangely, I think, was not ever intimidated. I always thought I can do this.
The McGuire sisters were rather huge in the 50s, and you featured them on your show.
Yeah.
Were they a favorite of yours?
Oh, who didn't love Phyllis, Dottie, and Chris, the McGuires? And I mean, they sang great, they were beautiful, they were funny, they had great senses of humor, and we're still friends. I hosted a PBS special just recently with Phyllis, and the girls were on it. It was the big pop hits of the 50s, and I swapped some hosting chores with Phyllis, and they still look great. They still look great, they still sing great, and of course, being part of the company with Arthur Godfrey was a real experience. He took us to places like Florida and Lake Placid, New York, and to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Hawaii and San Francisco, and host a show from those other places. And so we'd get lessons. If we went to Lake Placid in the snow country, we were given skating lessons. Now, some of the regulars complained that they had to go to Madison Square Garden or somewhere and learn how to ice skate. I was thrilled. And skiing, I mean, I was getting paid to take lessons to do something I wanted to know how to do anyway. I was getting paid to do it. I was thrilled. And I think the McGuires, they were always great sports. And Arthur knew that they, like I, would do anything he asked of us and do it the best we knew how.
I meant to ask you this earlier, but in the early days, you were talking about the, I guess, friendly rivalry between you and Elvis. Did he open for you at some point?
Yeah. In October, I think the 22nd, we do have some footage of October in 1955. My third record. I'd only been recording since March, but my third record, At My Front Door, or Crazy Little Mama Come Knocking at My Front Door, was becoming a big hit following Ain't That a Shame. Bill Randall, the nation's #1 DJ in Cleveland, brought me in from New York to headline a sock hop, about 3,000 kids in a high school in Cleveland. And when he picked me up at the airport, he said, we're bringing a kid up from Shreveport, Louisiana to be on tonight, too. He's appearing at the Louisiana Hayride. And I said, who is he? He said, Elvis Presley. I said, Elvis Presley? I heard his record on a jukebox in Dallas. He's a hillbilly, Bill. You think he's going to go over here tonight? He said, well, smiled. He said, RCA Victor thinks he's got something, so we'll hear tonight, see him. So he came backstage at the high school auditorium shortly before we both went on to Lip Sync Records, and he went on first because he was absolutely unknown to the Cleveland kids. And his collar was turned up and his hair all greased and long and his pants too long, and he had on some scuffed up white bucks too. And I said, hi, Elvis, I'm Pat Boone. Nice to meet you. I said, Bill Randall thinks that you may have some big things ahead for you. I don't know about that. I hope so. And he was clearly shy or nervous, so he backed against the wall. His little entourage closed in, and I quit trying to talk to him. Well, he went on, and the kids didn't know what to make of him at first because he sang Blue Moon of Kentucky, which is a real Flatt and Scruggs kind of song. And that was not in. But then I said, thank you very much. I'd like to do the other side of that record for you now. I hope you like it. And he did, That's All Right, Mama. That's all right with me. And that got the kids. And of course, he was good looking. He looked like a greaser, which was not in yet. The kids from the wrong side of the tracks, that they're not on the sports teams, they're not into school activities, they have cigarettes rolled up in their T-shirt sleeves, and they laugh at the kids that are playing it straight. And of course, they're like the bad boys, and the girls are not supposed to associate with them, but they're fascinated by him. Anyway, that's what he looked like. And later, when we were both renting houses in Bel Air and visiting back and forth, I said, "That first night, Elvis, you seemed so shy." "Well, I didn't know how to talk to you, man." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you were a star." I said, "A star? I'd only been recording since March." "Yeah, but you were on the charts." Well, he got over that shyness very quickly. That night, I did get the screams and the pandemonium when I went on, because I had 3 hit records. But I was smart enough never to follow Elvis again.
When your show was, when the Chevy Show was #1 in the ratings a lot of the time, and there were like 16 other shows, you said, that were variety shows fronted by very famous people. How did that feel, first of all, and then who was watching? Who was your audience?
This is a good question, because Chevrolet, in my 3rd season, did a big audience, a sponsor survey. They wanted to know exactly who, because they didn't have a lot of deep, accurate information about the ages of the people watching. So they did some kind of in-depth survey. And somewhat to their consternation, they found that my audiences, which were big, broke into about 4 segments. Of course, it was teenagers, about 40% teenagers. Well, they could hopefully sell cars to teenagers, if not immediately, soon. About 30% women, or I think the 30% was divided between men and women adults. But a big percentage was children, under 12, preteen, on down into kindergarten ages. And we were not doing a show aimed at kids. It was 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. But there was something in my demeanor, something about the way I hosted, I guess, or the way I looked or sounded. Maybe I looked like a young Captain Kangaroo, or I don't know. But we had a huge child audience, and I was always having parents say, my son or my daughter just insists we let him stay up, or her stay up to see your show from 9 to 9:30. How old? 5. Why? What are they? Well, they just like you. And so, of course, I loved it, because I had kids that age myself, but neither Chevy nor I or anybody's ever been able to quite figure out how it was that I was doing a show at an adult time period aimed at adults, pop music of the day and sketches and all that. And little kids insisted on watching it. And I still don't know why that was. Maybe somebody someday can tell me.
Was the show popular right out of the box?
Yep, the show was a big hit right off. And it was, of course, because I had hit records going. And by that time, Elvis had burst on the scene, and he and I were friendly competitors, and he wasn't on TV, but I was. So, and Colonel Tom Parker and Bing Crosby, my idol, wrote me. Bing, I treasure this letter. And his secretary told me later he never did that, but he knew I was a big fan of his, and we hadn't met yet. And he says, "I hear you're doing a new musical variety show. If I were your manager, I would advise against it, because you can wear out your welcome pretty fast on television. But since you're going ahead, I wish you well, and leave you with the sage words of George M. Cohan, never stay on too long. The above gratis, Bing." Well, I mean, it was too late to take his advice, but boy, I treasured it. And later, he congratulated me. He eventually went on TV, but Colonel Tom Parker, of course, wouldn't let Elvis. His appearances were very rare and far between, because he wisely knew that if you could get seeing him and hear his music free, why would you, maybe a lot of people wouldn't buy his records or even go to his movies. So he kept him off TV.
Did you choose the performers and the guests who came? I mean, your name was on the show. Did you choose your guests for the show?
I had very little. I could make suggestions. Can we get so and so as a guest on the show? But generally, it was whoever was available. Again, it was a mad scramble. I won't ever forget when Gina Lollobrigida, the great actress in her prime, was willing to come on, and not just come on, but sing. And I've just recently seen the videotape, which I never saw at the time, and had almost forgotten. But she sang quite well. You know, who knew? But but she's Italian, so you would expect her to be able to sing somehow, and maybe with some degree of ability. So she sure did. She sang well. But normally, they told me who the guests were, and I was happy.
Who are your favorites?
Favorite guests? Well, I guess the favorites for me were the all-time champions, Sammy Davis. To have Sammy Davis, the greatest entertainer we ever produced, other than maybe Al Jolson. I never saw him perform. But Sammy Davis, Nat King Cole, Ella Fitzgerald, Tony Bennett, Perry Como, and all these were willing to come on my show and be guests and sing their own songs, and then we would have some repartee, and then we would sing something together. I just was astounded that they were willing to do that. I was a kid, but I held my own. When I see now the videotapes, I marvel at it that I had the chutzpah to stand next to Ella Fitzgerald while we're singing together. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do-what, 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 do-what. And she's scatting, and I'm improvising on the melody, and she gave me a look once like, oh, when I changed the melody and took a little liberty, she like, oh, you don't have to just sing it straight. And then we sang my song, my big hit of I Almost Lost My Mind, in harmony together. She made it sound so heavenly, and I'm singing a harmony part, but the pitch was perfect on all of it. And I marvel at that now because, I know what it is to have plaster of Paris in my throat sometimes now when I get a little nervous and I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to sing what I am now committed to sing. Singing in front of Bing Crosby once on Dinah Shore's show. That she did a whole show of tribute to Bing. And I sang some of his hits with him sitting there looking at me. And, of course, Love Letters in the Sand, my biggest hit, had been a Bing Crosby hit, which is why we did it. And so I'm singing his songs. I'm holding a pipe and a hat on my head, and a golf club. Singing with Bing, that's when I say I felt like my throat turned to plaster of Paris. Because I'm trying to sound like Bing, and there's Bing looking right at me. But those were my favorites, the champions.
And that the show was a live show. How much rehearsal did you have, especially with the musical guests?
We generally would have a program brief, like a proposed run-through, and we would settle on some things, and that was Monday. Tuesday, there would be the beginning, first draft of a script, and songs were chosen. Wednesday, the guest was there and would sing his or her or their song and rehearse a duet with me and maybe whatever the sketch might be, the comedic sketch. And then Thursday, we were in the studio and blocking, and then set dress rehearsal and the show live. So literally, as far as the participation, me and the guests, it was like Tuesday, Wednesday, and show day. And that was it.
You became pretty well known as a solid pitchman for products on your show, and it continued in your career.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Why do people trust you so much?
Well, it gets back to the image thing, I guess, and since the image is not a fabricated, made-up thing, people, I think of me the way I think of myself, as a straight shooter. I wouldn't endorse a product that I proved that that I wouldn't endorse a product I wouldn't use myself and didn't believe was good, and I'm a family guy. And I asked the promoter in Japan, where I had a running love affair for many years. It was the most popular foreign performer in Japan till Michael Jackson came along. Why? Why does the Japanese audience like me, and he had me do commercials for coffee and for Lady Borden ice cream over there. And he says, well, Tots Nagashima, the promoter, said, well, we just see you as a family guy and just a down-to-earth kind of real person. And we like that in Japan. So now there came a time when our mores sort of shifted and changed, and where it was maybe more popular. I couldn't believe it when people were wanting John McEnroe, who I like a lot, and I played tennis with him. But when they were wanting the bad boy of tennis to do commercials and utilize, his petulant, they still do, even though he hasn't been on a tennis court like that for years. But now you can be, Alice Cooper. I did commercials for Sony with Cooper and let his long python wrap itself around me while he stood there with a glass of milk. We swapped images and did a commercial for Sony. So my image became very much ingrained, and it was fun to work against it sometimes and to surprise people, as I did with the heavy metal album.
You took the Chevy show overseas in the third season for a few shows. What prompted you to do that?
Going overseas was very unprecedented. I don't know that any half-hour music show ever did that, except ours. And it was the producers thinking we can shake things up a little bit, move out ahead of the pack. Let's take our show to Paris and do 2 shows there, and a show in Venice and a show in Salzburg, Austria. And these were even odd choices. We didn't go to Rome, we didn't go to Madrid or somewhere, to Salzburg, but it was to get that winter feel, and I was in lederhosen, and we sang songs that were appropriate and fabulous settings. In Venice, we rode around in gondolas and performed in San Marco Square, and it was very picturesque. Of course, Paris, we did 2 shows there and had Gilbert Bécaud and Pierre Angeli and terrific artists as our guests. But it was just to step out and do something out of the ordinary. It was expensive to do, of course. Took 30 people with us. But ABC footed the bill, and Chevrolet. And we did some very remarkable shows, I think.
What was the reception?
Great. The audience, the people watching, and then just the publicity. Pat's show from Paris, Pat's show from Venice, Pat's show from Austria, be sure you don't miss it, attracted more viewers. So, if I'd stayed on another 2 or 3 seasons, I'm sure we would have done a lot more traveling. Interesting, the biggest reaction I ever got to something I did on my own show was something it took me a couple of years to convince the producers and writers to let me do. And that was to sing the national anthem on my show. Because I'd heard that kids across America weren't hearing any of our patriotic songs anymore. They weren't singing them in school, and they were, unless they heard it, the national anthem at a ball game, they might not even know the words. So I thought, that's wrong. We ought to, this song, this is our national anthem. And people kept saying it's so hard to sing, but it's a challenge, but if you're a singer, you certainly should be able to sing your national anthem. So, most people do it, and so I said, let's just do it as a song. Let's stage it like one of our songs. And, they didn't want to do it. They were giving me these lame arguments, like people will think we're signing off at 9:30 off the network, or people will be eating dinner or something. They'll feel like they got to stand up, and, that's not a good song to sing on a musical variety show. But I insisted, finally. So in my 3rd season, we closed my show, and I said, I want to do this song, which is our national anthem. It is a song. I sing it with pride, of course, but it's music, and it's revered music in our country. So I'll end our show tonight. I won't be doing See the USA or anything at the end. And in a big bare studio, I started singing it a cappella. And, oh, say, can you see? And I had to stay on pitch until the music came in. Thank God I did. And it built from there. All I heard was a trumpet, a muted trumpet off in the distance to give me the key, and then sang it. And then it built to a big, big, big finish. Thank you, good night. Maybe I may have said, God bless America. We got an avalanche of mail. I mean, ABC and all those that were objecting to it had to eat their objections, because people across America loved hearing somebody do the song, treating it with real reverence and appreciation.
You told us the story of Harry Belafonte, and even though he ended up not being on the show because of his schedule, you took a stand, and I think you made your point. There's a story about Johnny Mathis. Can you tell us about that?
Johnny is such a great singer, such a good guy, an athlete too. I always liked that about Johnny, and we compared notes on about our love for athletics. And he loves to play basketball, loves to golf now. But he'd been I think a high jumper, maybe hurdler, on a track team in San Francisco. So he came on the show, and we were going to close the show with "Let There Be Peace on Earth." Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. And doing it together. And the way it was staged was another big bear, no props, no sets, anything except a ladder for some reason. In the back of this cavernous studio was a door open with a bright light shining. So I thanked Johnny for being on, and now we're going to close the show. And the way it was staged was we're up against this ladder, but I'm standing on a couple of rungs above Johnny. And I don't know why that was, but I didn't like it, but I didn't question it. But I knew there was the problem down south with the Chevy dealers. So this might have been a little insensitive to that, but when we went on the air live, I just forgot to go up on that couple rungs on the ladder. I stayed standing on the floor with Johnny. We're about the same height. So we sang, "Let there be peace on earth. Let it begin with me." Good night, folks. And we turn and walk away from the camera toward that bright light at the back of the studio. And I just sort of casually threw my arm over his shoulder as we walked toward that bright light. Now, to me, I thought that was a very subtle, nice statement. We're buddies. We're brothers in music. And we like each other. So we're friends. And we did get repercussions, and that did lead then to more concern on the part of some of the customers down south for Chevrolet. And it was something we just had to contend with. And being from the South, I understood it, but I felt like you would maybe do some subtle things. I was asked to come to South Africa. This wasn't so subtle. Nobody knew about this. But in the heat of my career in 1960, I was asked to come to South Africa. They were offering me all kinds of money, but I'd heard about this policy called apartheid. And I said, "Look, guys, I can't tell you how to run your country. You've got your problems. We've had our problems. But if people can't have money and want to come hear me sing, it will be forbidden because of cultural or racial or skin color or any other reason. I can't do it. I'm sorry." So I turned them down a couple times. But again, we had a closed-door meeting, and the promoters that were wanting me to come said, "Look, you got to keep this quiet, no publicity, but the administration, the government in South Africa is willing to suspend the policy for your concerts of apartheid if there will be no publicity about it." I said, "So anybody who wants to buy a ticket can come see me sing?" "Okay, I'll do it." So in 1960, I toured South Africa, starting in Durban, went on to Cape Town, Pretoria, Johannesburg, I forget a couple other big cities in South Africa. Death threats, because the word was out that it would be mixed audiences, which was really forbidden. But the government lifted the policy, and we never had any real incidents. We, as I say, had death threats and increased security. But we just went through the shows, and I sang "This Land Is Mine," Exodus, that I'd just written the words for. And I said, this is, thought of as about Israel, and it is, but I mean it to be sung by anybody who loves his country, anybody, inferring black, white, Indian, colored, yellow, whatever, as long as he or she loves his country. And so I sang Exodus, "This land is mine," God, and for them. And even up in Salisbury, Northern Rhodesia, no incident. And they said after the concert there that it was the first day in weeks that there'd been no violence. And so I came home, never talked about it for 30 years, because that was the agreement. But now, of course, apartheid is no more.
Do you think that your personal approach to race relations at least helped to pave the way for change later?
Jesse Jackson made a comment the other day, fairly recently, about a year ago. Stunned me, really, because I had not seen it this way. But I was on their radio station with his daughter, Santita. I had just done an album of rhythm and blues classics with the original performers, with Smokey Robinson, the Four Tops, Earth, Wind and Fire, Sister Sledge, Kool and the Gang, and even went to Augusta, Georgia, and recorded Papa's Got a Brand New Bag with James Brown. He said, hey, Pat's got a brand new bag. And so I was promoting the album on the radio station in Chicago, and Jesse came on. And we talked a bit about Red Foley, about how they loved Red Foley on WLS in Chicago when he was there. And then we heard about Pat Boone, his son-in-law, and we liked him too a lot, his music. And he said then he began to record rhythm and blues songs by artists like Little Richard and Fats Domino and Chuck Berry and Ivory Joe Hunter and the Flamingos and on and on. And he said, I believe Pat Boone did more for race relations through his music than any other performer. And I couldn't believe he was saying that, because I'm thinking Stevie Wonder, Ray Charles, on and on and on, Motown. But he said when Pat Boone sang those songs, it was at a time when our music was called race music, and the pop audiences had no regard for it at all, or for the performers. But when white bread Pat Boone out of Nashville is doing these songs and they're becoming hits, he's saying, I like this music, and not only that, I like the performers too. And he said it melted a lot of people's prejudices about the singers and the music, and it made it acceptable to a big white audience. And I knew that some of that was true, but to hear Jesse Jackson say he thought that my doing those songs had done more to improve race relations than any other music performer. Because the others that came along, was after the resistance had been broken down, and so who wouldn't like Stevie Wonder? Who wouldn't like Michael Jackson? Who wouldn't like Ray Charles, or the Supremes, or Smokey, or anybody? Even though there'd be a residual, some dislike somewhere. But I hadn't really realized till then the significance of my doing those songs when I did them, and coming from where I came from and being who I was. So I'm happy about that.
After the third season of the Chevy Show,
I guess we need to start to wind up. Do you have much else? I mean, go ahead if you do. I'll try to keep my answers a little shorter.
Okay.
I don't know I have much else to offer, but I will try.
Okay. Why did you decide to end the Chevy Show after the third season in 1960?
Having done 3 seasons of a half-hour show and seeing a lot of them drop by the wayside, but the hour shows, Dinah Shore and Perry Como, were doing well. It just seemed a natural progression. So if I was going to do TV, I should graduate to an hour. And that maybe I was on a ship that was going to sink pretty soon, the half-hour musical variety show, as had the 15-minute show. So we told Chevy that I wanted to do an hour, and they said, well, we can't do it. And so I realized, and also my wife, seeing how extremely busy I always was, and having to be gone a lot of the time, she said, let's go to somewhere. You pick the place, but let's go where you can do it all in one place. So we decided we would move to California, Beverly Hills, and I could do my movies, I could do the TV, I could do the recording, I could do it all from home base and be together with my family more. So, and I could do some specials, which I did, and then later we did, our family did specials. And they were high-rated, nice specials on ABC. Jerry Weintraub was responsible for those. And it was great. We loved it because the whole family had been a singing act for 7 years. It was my way of keeping my teenage daughters in sight at all times. Made them part of my act and my shows.
When you were out in L.A., you did a daytime show for NBC, the Pat Boone Show, in 1966. How did that come about?
You know, I did 2 daytime shows. The first that Filmways ever did, a syndicated show. They wanted to go into the syndicated hour variety show like Mike Douglas, like Merv Griffin, and they knew that I could sing like Mike Douglas, well, Merv too, and have guests, and I was comfortable hosting, and so Filmways, we did 13 weeks from the Hollywood Video Center on Vine. A nice studio. We had great producers, and we had we did sketches. We made up operas sometimes with Paul Smith playing on the piano and just creating the bed for us to sing to, scripted jokes, but we would sing them. Dustin Hoffman actually had just done The Graduate, and wasn't that well known yet, and we did some very inventive stuff. I gave Richard Pryor his first network exposure on that Filmways show and made him my co-host for a week. We knew he could be pretty daring and dirty, but he also knew it was a family show, so we never had any problem. And Richard Pryor, who'd have thought Pat Boone would give him his break on television? But Filmways, after 13 weeks, was disappointed in the ratings, I think, not taking into account that when you do a syndicated show, you go into markets that have already got shows with established audiences, and it's going to take some time for people to learn that you're there and switch over to a different channel and start watching you. And so after 13 weeks, they canceled the show, but they continued to rerun it for another 13 weeks, and the rating kept going up in the rerun period, and they realized they'd made a mistake. The same thing happened at NBC, a daytime show in the morning, 10 a.m., and we did a very good daytime music variety show and had a lot of great guests. We had Jack Benny, we had Bob Hope, we had all kinds of great guests. And again, after 13 weeks, they had not reached the rating level they'd hoped for, so they canceled it and went to a game show. But for the second 13 weeks, they just reran the first 13 weeks, and again, the rating kept going up, and they realized in both cases, if they just let the show build an audience the way Merv had, the way Mike Douglas had, and the others who were now staples, that we would have had a good show and a well-rated show.
You did Pat Boone in Hollywood in 1969. What was that show? What was the format?
That Pat Boone in Hollywood was a daring attempt on my part, along with CBN, to the Family Network, became known as the Family Network, to do a musical variety show, which is what I wanted to do. I still do. I would still love to be doing it. And we decided to do it from Knott's Berry Farm, where we'd always have an audience in the daytime. We'd have no problem getting a family-type audience whenever we did a show. And I not only hosted the show and produced it, but put up half the money for the first 13 weeks. But the same thing happened. We didn't have fancy sets. We tried to make up for that. We were doing it at the Cloud 9 Theater, but we had great guests. We had Lee Greenwood on one of the first shows he ever sang, God Bless the USA, and there was a huge standing ovation. But we had comedic guests. We had singing guests. We had I had a little feature on that show called, we called it Pat Boone USA, I thought. Yeah, Pat Boone in Hollywood was the show downtown Hollywood for Filmways. But Pat Boone USA wrote the title song for it, and we had guests, not just guests, but audience participation, and it was a lot of fun. But CBN canceled it because they didn't get the rating until the rerun period, and then the ratings went up.
We're going to take tape real quick.